I have a little story to tell you. If you ever have a parole hearing or a sentencing hearing, you don't want to get the one that's scheduled right before lunch or the last one of the day. Plenty of research has been done that shows that, yeah, it's bad because the judge's hungry, grumpy. So I figure you guys are all hungry and grumpy. No. So we're going to talk about enterprise development. Now, do I need to convince anybody that enterprise development is dysfunctional? No? No? Okay. So the reason I think it's dysfunctional may be different from the reason you think it's dysfunctional. But just so everybody knows, I'm that guy. You probably heard about me at this conference already. The VB developer. I think Indu was talking about people who had code bases from 30 years ago. Yeah, that would be me. You really don't want to get those kind of phone calls. It's like, I had a friend when I started out. I worked with him for a while. It got to be about 1997, 98. He was a VMS programmer. Anybody know what VMS is? VAX? Yeah, okay, there's a few people, right? Well, he was a VMS programmer. And he took all of his accumulated vacation, like 3 months worth, off in 1999. Guess what he was doing? Anybody? Yes. Yeah, Y2K consulting for VMS systems. Yeah, anyway. So what I want to talk to you about is why I think open source software is the solution or a solution to the problems that we face in enterprise development. Now, you'll notice this quote here. This is something we all have a problem with. Like, we don't find the truth, we find a truth. I'm going to talk to you today about a truth that I think I've found. So, really, enterprise development at OSS. I almost redid all my slides and just took quotes from other talks I've heard today because all of them, they were, great illustrations. So if you were here for the keynote, you remember the Halloween documents? So it's kind of been a long, slow struggle for Microsoft, right, to get to the point where they understand open source. They're not, maybe not 100% there, but they're getting there. Big companies move slowly. You know what moves more slowly than Microsoft? Their enterprise customers. So some people are going to say that, enterprise development at OSS, that's like Superman and kryptonite. By the way, for the comic book nerds, there's always a few, right? There's more than one kind of kryptonite. That's important. So other folks think it's like chocolate and peanut butter. Apologies to anybody who's allergic to either of those things. They're the best thing in the world, and they're the best things in the world together. But I have come to a conclusion that it really is chocolate and peanut butter. So an alternate title for this talk might have been How to Get Invited to Pragmaticon 2016. So if you haven't seen this, you ought to go read this blog post by Eric Sink. He was talking to all the F# folks about why their F# evangelism is not working. That's not what I want to talk about, but I did like, he included the crossing the chasm thing from Jeffrey Moore. So has everybody seen this before? Yeah, this is kind of a big deal. So you have to understand that if you're at this conference, it is very likely that you are an early adopter. Any non-early adopters here? Because I don't really consider myself one. I'm actually a pragmatic sort of person. I get to go to Pragmaticon. Unfortunately, I'm also by nature a heretic. So even though I'm here to represent the pragmatic folks of the world, don't assume that the rest of them believe like me, because they don't. That's just one of those things. Now, Sink says that the chasm exists because pragmatists generally adopt new techniques as a herd. Does everybody understand what that means? It's like you need, if you're part of a corporate environment, say you're a corporate CIO. Can anybody imagine themselves as a corporate CIO? Yeah, I didn't think so yet. Anyway, but just stretch your mind here for a little bit and think about this. You never want to be the first or the last person to adopt a technology, right? It's sort of like a school of fish. What happens to the last fish in the school? That's the one that gets eaten by the sharks, right? The predators come after you if you wait too long, right? But you also don't want to be leading the school, because you lead the school into a dangerous spot and everybody turns on you. That's what happens. That's the life of people in corporate software development. It's just the way it is. So why is .NET Enterprise Development dysfunctional? Now, these are some of the answers that you will commonly hear if you hang out, on the internets or something like that. So is it the .NET stack? Is it, because that's what the JavaScript framework people will tell you, right? And they have almost 2 months of experience in development, so we should listen to them. Sorry, I'm being a grouchy old man again. So, you know what JavaScript is? It dawned on me the other day. JavaScript is the new C. So, a few people old enough to remember when people wrote things in C because that's how they could get it on any platform. Every platform had a C compiler, and nobody except for the Jeff Nortons of the world really want to look at assembler, right? I mean, just don't want to do that. So what do, right? So everybody wrote things in C, and C would let you do anything. You could get away with anything, and the C runtime libraries were everywhere. So that's what we have in JavaScript, to let you get away with anything, and the runtime is everywhere. Now, you might think that it's JavaScript's fault that there's a lot of bad JavaScript code. That is not the case. Anybody ever done Ruby on Rails? Okay, I don't really mean to insult you. This is actually a compliment. But if JavaScript's the new C, Ruby on Rails is the new COBOL. Right? Because you know what you did with COBOL back in the day? Now, COBOL's actually before my time. I did do a demo of COBOL.net. Anybody ever see that? Yeah. So anyway, so the thing about languages like JavaScript and Ruby on Rails and Visual Basic, yes, I coded in VB3. I met somebody at the conference. This is like blew my mind. He remembered me from what I taught a VB6 course in the 90s. That's kind of scary. Anyway, you can write good code. You can write enterprise code in any language. I know people who write enterprise code in Python. Oh, we got one? Okay, I'll try not to say anything bad. No, actually, I love Python. It's just not what I get paid for. Okay, so I don't think it's the stack. Now, you'll also hear a bunch of people say, enterprise, duh, right? Enterprise software development is just inherently broken. It has all these enterprisey features. How many times have you heard the word enterprisey here? Yeah, I've heard it a few, right? So what's the deal with enterprisey? Is like, those are actually real concerns, right? They might not be your concerns, but I've been an enterprise developer or a consultant helping enterprise developers for, let's say, over 20 years. Okay, let's just leave it at that. Here's the thing. Every enterprise has an IT guy. Oh, that's the other thing, too. I've been the IT guy a few times, too. Guess what? You know what the IT guy's job is? Say no. Well, no, not exactly. It's close, though. And developers always say that, right? So the IT guy's job is to make sure nothing changes. And if you're a developer, what is your job? To change stuff, right? So that's why you think they always say no. Now, we say yes all the time when we're IT guys, just not to you developer people. But security, the legacy system, all those things are legitimate concerns. Yes, most enterprises could do with paring down their deployment process. I've helped a few people do that. That's great. But you know what? It's still, Sarbanes-Oxley is still there. They have to make up some sort of story to tell them. The last one, people will tell you that software development is just broken. Software development in general is broken. That may or may not be true, but that's not what we can fix. So I'm going to ignore that one for now. So let's talk about the enterprise domain. So there's one thing about the enterprise domain. There's real dollars on the line here, right? It's not one of these startup things where you have fake dollars from the VC, right? Yeah, if you got that gig, more power to you, but that's not the world I live in. The world I live in is we have real dollars to deal with. And that drives a lot of things about software development. And, okay, so Microsoft people aren't in the room, are they? Oh, uh-oh. Okay, close yours. No. So the best and the worst thing about .NET is Microsoft, right? Technically, I think .NET is an excellent platform. Now I'm going to say something that I don't think anybody in the room is probably going to agree with me on, but I'm going to tell you what I've learned after all these years. Microsoft doesn't really understand enterprise development, okay? Well, somebody agreed with me. Oh no, I think I'm going to have a heart attack. They don't. The reason they don't is they don't hire people who write line of business applications, because that's not their business. And when they do, it's like dynamics, and that's a whole other thing we won't talk about. But anyway, so can anybody tell me what that is? It's an invoice, right? So I'm going to guess if you've written a line of business application, at some point or another, you have to generate invoices. Now, can you see what that is? It's the ship to address. Now, this is where I'm going to tell you that enterprise development is not about relational databases, not even SQL Server, and it's not about objects. And the reason it's not about either one of those things is that ship to address. 10 years from now, there's some accountant that's going to want to know where that invoice, the products associated with that invoice were shipped to. And the answer is not the current address of that company in the database, right? Everybody gets that. I mean, it might be, but that would just be luck, right? There is a whole lot of the enterprise world that doesn't really fit that well into these standard, stick it into objects, push it through EF or some other ORM of your choice into a relational database. Now, we make it fit all the time. I spent a long time in my career making that fit, but there is inherently something that is not quite table-driven and not quite object-driven about the enterprise domain. Now, what is this? Surely you could read that. I think I could read that from back. It's an order form, right? So if you have invoices, you probably have orders, right? What do orders have? Right? Every demo in the book has orders, right? You have an order and you have line items to order, right? Think about that one for a minute and try to wean yourself away from the notion of, how those things are built and what they really are. Now, can you see this? It's a pricing engine. Now, how many people here would consider themselves enterprise developers? Nobody? A few of you. Okay. Have you ever written a pricing engine? Yeah. So everybody does this, right? If you're an enterprise developer, if you're not an enterprise developer, this side of the room apparently is not enterprise development. This is somebody's pricing engine with their entire object model. Can't really read this very well, but I'm going to stand in. So you got your promotions and all taxes and all that, this giant, beautiful object model. Now, you know what happens to this object model? When I've done this a few times, I've had it done to me a few times. The business changes how they do pricing. Why does the business change how they do pricing?
Make more money.
Yeah, bingo. Tax laws change, right? Change happens, and it changes, and guess what? It will almost always end up changing in a way that your object model did not encompass. So what is a pricing engine? Just real generally. Anybody? You hand it some inputs, and it spits out a number, right? Most of my career, that's been dollars and cents, but you may use some other currency. That's fine too. It all works pretty much the same way. Inputs in, price out. Guess what you shouldn't do in a pricing engine? Change anything. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Inputs in, numbers come out. Don't change anything while you're doing it. So here's what I'm going to tell you. The enterprise domain, structural equality. Now, we had this back at VB. Anybody willing to admit they were a VB programmer? Oh, yeah, right? We had that. Now, what we didn't have was immutable objects or immutable data, any of that sort of thing. But that's actually very handy because most of the time when you're dealing in an enterprise domain, you need to make sure that you keep track of what actually happened, right? These are not, now, if there's any F# people in there, oh yeah, no. You can do this in any language you want, even JavaScript, right? Now, some languages lend themselves better to this than others. So the Akka.NET guy's back there, so I hate to make his head too big or anything, but one of the reasons that on my current project we picked up Akka.NET is because it allowed us to have a C# object model that was built on the notion that, those messages are immutable, right? So think about how business works. Forget all the computers. The easiest way to do this is think about how a small business works. Businesses run off of messages, right? Your invoice has no behavior, right? It's just a thing, and people have the behavior. So when you get to your pricing engine, and you will get to your pricing engine, it's going to be functional. Another thing, Microsoft does not help a whole lot here. They have some things, but there's a whole lot of document generation. I'm not talking about reports. This is not SSRS. This is actual documents that have to come out of a printer that people are going to sign. This last thing is OSS. And everybody's like, where is this talk going? Anybody thinking that right now? Yeah, me too. No, just kidding. So here's the thing. There are very good reasons why Microsoft is never going to solve these problems, okay? Does anybody remember when, before WCF came out, and it was called Indigo? Oh, some people remember that, yeah. Okay, so I was probably the Indigo MHP. That's the most hated person. Anyway, I'm sure WCF has solved somebody's problem somewhere. I have never met that person, but I have faith that that has actually happened. Now, I told those guys that this set of things was going to happen. And everything you've ever experienced with WCF, I knew that was going to happen. Okay, that's not because I'm smart. It's because I had actually written line of business applications. Anyway, we really shouldn't expect that from Microsoft. Microsoft is not going to fill every need of the ecosystem, even though the enterprise customers really wish they would. I'm working with a guy right now. He's a little younger than I am. He's actually about the age of my oldest son. So I have a son who's 31 years old who's a software developer. Okay, so everybody in the room can decide whether or not I'm old enough to be your dad. Now, anyway, my coworker says to me that, Microsoft projects, Microsoft .NET Stack projects fail to the Microsoft stack, right? Knock out jQuery, although I think we got Angular in there now, but jQuery, MVC, ASP.NET, MVC, what's called EF, SQL Server, right? Nothing wrong with any of those things. Well, okay, there's a few things wrong with EF, but here's the thing. Most of the people in this room own or contribute to some open source project in the .NET space. Now, not every open source project needs to appeal to enterprise developers. However, if you're playing in the .NET space, it will help. Why will it help? So how many .NET developers are there? Somebody said in the keynote, right? 10 million, right? Give or take a few million, right? Guess how many of those are enterprise developers? Anybody want to guess? Way more than half. Way more than half. Okay, so I think that enterprise developers can actually work for your project if you can work for the enterprise developer. Enterprise developers are not used to people helping them, right? All we put up with is abuse, seriously. So, if you want to know how win IntDev friends, IntDev is how we're going to talk about enterprise developers because I need some water and it gets hard to say enterprise developers all the time. So, you need to tell your story. You need to look like a pro and you need to play well with others. Now, let's talk about that for a minute. Tell your story. Every open source project has a story. Marketing 101. You don't sell your product. You don't sell your features. You sell your customer on the idea that you can make that customer what they want to be. Has anybody ever heard this before? Most developers have never heard this. But everybody who's ever been in marketing has heard this. And it's true. What do enterprise developers want to be? They want to be done. They want to go home at 5 o'clock and go live their life. I know you guys don't have a life. That's okay. But enterprise developers have a life. So think about that. So your documentation is inadequate. Even projects that have good documentation, their documentation is not enough. Aka.net, since he's in the room, I'll harass it. Their documentation is great, and it's not good enough. Right? You need to have some samples, and you need to look at this stuff from the point of view of an enterprise developer if you want to appeal to enterprise developers. Now, Hello World is fine, everybody knows that, but most enterprise developers are not concerned about saying Hello World. Right? Think about your samples and example code in the context of what does an enterprise developer want to do? What problem can you solve for them? Because the enterprise developer has a problem. Because once we finish one problem, we go on to the next one. The enterprise never runs out of problems for software developers to do. Hasn't for my entire career, and it's just gotten worse, right? There's more problems than ever, right? Why? You know how people say that software is eating the world? You know why that is? Software is eating the world because it solves people's problems, right? Problems that involve money. So, the enterprise developer has a question when he comes to your project. That question is this the solution to my problem today? Right? If it turns out not to be, he may keep it in his head because it might be the answer to tomorrow's question. But their question is this the solution to today's problem? And if your project doesn't have a way of telling that story, you're not going to get any uptake. Now, you need to look like a pro. Now, I want to back up here. I'm making a couple of assumptions. The Xamarin guy's downstairs, so that's one model for getting money from, or getting uptake in corporations, right? Corporations have lots of money, right? They will spend it on dev tools. But if you're going to do that, you're going to have people in suits that go sell, stuff like that. Most open source projects don't have that, right? So I'm assuming that you're not going that model. You're probably not going the service stack model. There's not that much room in the .NET world for that many projects like that. So I'm assuming you have a volunteer project. You may have some consultants or companies that are supporting you, but you have to do this on your own, but you need to look like a pro. Because what happens is eventually the developer who picks your project to use has to justify it to somebody, right? So I want to talk about something I don't see very many projects doing. Tell me who's using your project. Let me find somebody from my herd because that's the easiest way to get it past the muckety mucks, right? Everybody know what a muckety muck is? People who might wear ties occasionally. Right? See if you can get some of your users, because most open source projects have users from big corporations. Not an official endorsement. You don't want to go through marketing and legal and all that stuff. No, just have a quote from somebody and let them put their title and their company. Did anybody catch my title and company? I work for a company called Improving. I work in the Houston office. I don't know any of the people in Dallas. However, they do Improving up here. hosts a lot of user groups and things, so you should check that out. Okay, I got my ad in there. See, that's what corporations do. They get their ad. Anyway, so also, did anybody notice my shirt? Can you see what it says on my shirt? It says Developer Days, and then it has a year. So this is the speaker shirt from Developer Days 2001. Okay, in case you didn't know already that I'm old, I'm old. No, I put that up there because that was the first time I talked about .NET. Okay, it wasn't even out yet. Yeah, I know I said I wasn't really the early adopter, but I got paid to do this one. So anyway, not the speaking gig, the learning .NET. Anyway, so you need to tell people who's using the product that's a member of the herd, right? Doesn't matter if it's some tiny project at ExxonMobil. Well, probably not ExxonMobil. Let me pick somebody more realistic. It could be at GM. It could be at some oil. If it's in Houston, if it's somebody in the oil business, that's good, right? Because yeah, that's most of it there. Next thing, if you have a website, make it look professional, right? I mean, even I can make a site look good with Twitter Bootstrap, right? I spent all my career doing, plumbing stuff, right? I resisted the web as long as I could, but eventually I gave in. And I thought it was terrible, and then I could throw up a static site with Twitter Bootstrap. You can make it look professional. Okay, now, we're talking about .NET. There are 3 places you need to be. I'm assuming you've already got a NuGet package, okay? Stack Overflow. Do you have a tag on Stack Overflow? Because let's face it, that's where every corporate developer goes to figure out what's going on, right? No, they really do. You don't always copy and paste the code, but Anyway, you need to be on Stack Overflow, and somebody needs to be answering the questions. I will guarantee you, if a corporate developer goes to Stack Overflow, finds a tag, and finds a whole bunch of unanswered questions, they're not going to be using your project. GitHub, right? We don't usually go look at the code, but that's where we expect open source to be these days. Please don't make me look at Codeplex. This is an important one. I don't know that most open source projects know about this. Pluralsight. Now, I know the guys who started Pluralsight. I've known them for a long time. I'm not here to give them an ad, except to say that most corporate developers, the one thing we get, a few years ago they cut all the travel budgets for training, right? But a lot of us got Pluralsight subscriptions through our boss. Or we get it through MSDN for, whatever. And, if you know what to do, you can always go snag, that 1 week free trial, because if it takes me longer than 1 week to learn your stuff, it's not going to happen anyway. But guess what? If you do your own, you actually get paid for this. So, play well with others. This is important in the corporate environment. Now, there's one thing that's not up here that I'm going to tell you. Please, for the love of God, don't make me talk to the IT security guy, okay? I don't want to have to open up a port for your stuff, right? If you can't do it over port 80, I don't want to hear about it. Everybody understand that? I used to be the IT security guy. I can tell you why that is, but there's nothing to gain from opening a port on the firewall. I mean, literally nothing can be gained from that. So, now, you do need to know where you fit in the stack. Most corporate developers on the .NET stack, default choice is the Microsoft choice, right? What do you replace? What do you connect to? Where do you fit? I need to understand that if I'm going to know how to explain it to my boss. It doesn't matter to me so much, right? Except when I'm the architect and the developer's got to explain it to me. So, know where you fit. Check your license. People have made some comments about, oh, they're still afraid of the GPL. Guess what? It's not corporate developers who are afraid of that. It's the lawyers. I don't know why they're afraid of it. I have a daughter who's about to graduate from law school this year. I talked to her about this. No, there's no problem with it, but that doesn't matter. Again, just like the IT security guy, for whom there's no benefit to opening a port on the firewall, if anybody's ever said something that, the GPL could get us in trouble, there's no advantage, they're not going to approve it. So if you can possibly do it, go with the MIT license or Apache license, something useful. Something that, this is weird. I wouldn't have believed this until I ran into it. Don't go with public domain. That freaks them out worse than the GPL. I don't know why. Just put a license on it. So, this is probably the most important thing. If I'm a developer who wants to use your project in my project, I have to show business value before the boss, the architect, the team lead finds out about it, right? Because developers, we have commit rights to our repos, right? Usually they're TFS, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, you need to have an on-ramp for your project, and the bigger it is, the more important this is. If you're a tiny little utility, maybe not as big a deal. But I have to be able to show some business value before anybody finds out I'm actually using it, because you know what? The biggest lever a developer has if you're in enterprise development? Fixing a user's problem. Nobody wants to go tell the user, oh no, your fix is going to be put off while we find some other solution other than this one that is already working. So think about that if you want to get customers in the enterprise space. Okay, so I touched on this a little bit. Pragmaticon doesn't really exist. There's not really a convention where people get together and decide, oh, we're sticking with SQL this year, and make sure your developers aren't using Ruby. This is all from Eric Seek's blog post, but in a way, Pragmaticon does exist, okay? It's not an official meeting, but you can get the minutes from it if you pull open a CIO magazine, right? You find out, like, the cloud's okay, but not for your really serious, sensitive data, which is the dumbest thing in the world. Because, okay, Microsoft could do a better job of protecting your data than your corporate IT people. Having been a corporate IT person, I know this for a fact, okay? That doesn't matter, right? Reason doesn't play into this, right? This is just the way things are. This is your life as an enterprise developer. Now, maybe fame and fortune among enterprise developers isn't what you really want. But what is it that every open source project needs? What do you want? You want users, contributors. Eventually you want people, to lead. Make yourself available to those folks, and it will come. I'm here not so much, I have done a little tiny bit of open source work. One of the things, by the way, I didn't mention this, but I was an English and history major many years ago. I'm one of those guys, backed into programming. Guess what? One of my advantages in my career has been the fact that I can write an email that normal people can read and understand. Very few open source projects really go to much effort to convince people like me to write some documentation or to fix the documentation they have, because before I was a developer, one of the things I did, I was a proofreader, okay? You have typos, you have poor grammar, it's just there. Don't be offended if I send you a pull request for your documentation to, fix your grammar. I actually did that to Don Syme. Anybody know who Don Syme is? Yeah, he's the father of F#, right? He asked for a pull request. I noticed he had a typo. Typos are embarrassing. So I sent him a pull request. He accepted it all in about 10 minutes, which is weird because he's in Australia, right? Somewhere on the other side of the world. But anyway. But I think the corporate developer, the enterprise developer, is actually going to be the secret weapon for open source. I really do. And the reason I think that's true is because there's something different today than there was for the rest of my career. And what's different is Microsoft has decided open source is okay. Now, that is not sufficient for corporations to pick up open source, but it was necessary. Because I'm telling you, you don't have the marketing clout that Microsoft has, right? If you're an enterprise customer, you get this whole team of people from Microsoft to come hold your hand and explain the latest thing from Microsoft, and mostly it's okay. But here's the deal, folks. What you need to know is that if you're going to play in the .NET space, you are playing in the enterprise space for the most part. Now, Microsoft's trying to change that, right? They have BizSpark and cloud stuff, and I'm sure that's going to work, right? Microsoft has deep enough pockets they can make long plays, right? Your open source project needs to focus on the here and now and the immediate future. And I think, actually, with a little effort, I think this will pay off for folks. So, how much time do we have? Anybody need to keep it 5 minutes? Okay. Anybody have any questions? This was probably not the talk you expected. It's not like any of the other talks, but it's a talk I came prepared to give.